So let me get into this conversation. It's my honor to introduce the one and only Kevin Rose, serial entrepreneur, investor, and podcaster. In 2004, Kevin founded Dig, one of the earliest social news sites. Recently, he founded Zero, an intermittent fasting app, and Oak, an app that teaches meditation. So listen, folks, he's still out here founding companies, okay? He began his investing career as an angel investor in Twitter, Facebook, and Square, later joining Google Ventures as general partner. So he knows a thing or two, okay, about investing in successful companies. Today, he continues to invest in startups as a partner at True Ventures, a venture capital firm that invests in early stage technology startups. And I know we have lots in the audience, so pay attention. And they have more than $2 billion under management. Just $2 billion, no big deal. He also hosts two podcasts, not one, but two, which you'll see in the setup. He's got a beautiful podcast setup, Foundation, and the Kevin Rose Show, okay? A podcast exploring how to reach peak personal and professional performance while living a minimal and balanced life. Rose lives in Portland, which is funny because of Rose City. I'm sure Kevin has heard this a million times. So Kevin, ignore the joke that I just made with his wife, Daria, who's an accomplished author, by the way, okay? Plug in her. She's amazing. They're two beautiful children, and their mini Labradoodle toaster who still thinks he can chase squirrels. Kevin, how are you today?
Paige, thank you so much for that introduction. That was amazing. I think that's maybe the best introduction I've ever had. You even
tell your friends.
That toaster
tell your
in
friends.
there. That was fantastic.
Tell your friends. Tell your friends. How are you feeling after this Thanksgiving holiday? Before we get into it.
I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, I told you just before we started that my poor little mini Labradoodle chased a squirrel, and we have lots of those in our backyard. He hurt himself during Thanksgiving, so I was at the emergency room during Thanksgiving trying to get him all patched up, but he's okay, so that's good. It was scary there for a minute, though.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to everyone but the squirrels. So I'm just going to go on record.
Exactly.
All right, great. So today we only have a short period of time together. Listen, I'm going to just remind you all, Kevin's got a podcast, so you can go listen to his voice more. I'm going to try to focus on specifically health and tech today in two different ways. One is really thinking about health and tech for founders, right? So as founders are starting their companies, how do they protect their health while running a tech startup? But then also talk a little bit about the future of health tech. Before we get into that, though, I just want people to know a little bit about you, Kevin. So before this baller bio, before you were just racking up these gold medals, tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what were you like as a kid, your parents, your siblings, the gist, little basics.
Yeah, happy to. Well, I was born in Redding, California, but then actually the Oregon connection is I lived in Salem for a bit when I was just a little kid. And we then moved to Las Vegas, of all places. I got into tech, into computers pretty early on. I was a geek. It wasn't cool back then. You got made fun of for being into technology.
I remember those days.
It was a tough high school. It was a tough high school.
Rough high school, good life. Okay, got you.
Yeah, so I mean, it was. I didn't know if I had chosen the right path back then, but it was the thing that I was just drawn to, right? So I love to nerd out and geek out, and I moved out to the Bay Area in 2000 because that's just where everything was going on. The first .com boom, I thought I would catch it, and I got there, and I was just really devastated when it all blew up. But I stayed there. I thought that San Francisco was a fantastic place to meet other kind of like-minded entrepreneurs and people that were just hacking on really cool projects, and that led me to a long career there in technology. So I would say just recently in the last couple of years, I've been here now 2.5 years in Portland. My mom lives here, my sister lives here, so it just felt good to get back and be, especially with two little girls, one 3-year-old and one almost 2. We needed this space, and San Francisco is, it's not the best place to raise a family, I would say.
Bless you. No shade to San Francisco, but shade to San Francisco, maybe.
No, I mean, it's a great city. It's just like, it's really tough. I actually heard a stat that they have less, for the density of the city, it has the least number of kids there. So people just move out the second they have children. So it's really hard to find playmates and do other things like that. And the schools are severely oversubscribed. And, then they have a big issue with sadly, a lot of heroin use on the streets and a lot of stuff that goes unchecked there. So great for working in startups, not so much on the family side.
Well, and I think one of the reasons why so many folks who are in the tech community love and live in Portland too is because it is a beautiful space where you can get access to the mountains and the coast, and yeah, just I think have more space, which is something that I think a lot about, having space to run, especially now when we need to get our kids out of the house and let them run for a while. Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about Kevin Rose as an entrepreneur, I read a lot of your thought pieces. I read some Twitter. I checked out your podcast. And what I'm really curious about are like the juicy things you don't talk about in those articles, and specifically about what it means to be a successful entrepreneur. So I feel like we see those top 10, like here are the 5 things you do on Medium. That's at least what I'm getting in my inbox every day to be a successful entrepreneur. What do you think is the most surprising key insight that you learned about what it really takes to be a successful entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I think that the number one common thread amongst like all of the best entrepreneurs is just admitting that they don't know something. That is absolutely the key, and I mean that in terms of being the first to like kind of raise your hand and go say, no matter who you're in front of, whether it be your board members, your investors, it doesn't really matter. Other coworkers saying, I don't understand this. I need to go do the research. I need to surround myself with the best people to learn this slice that is currently missing. And we all have those. They're blind spots. They're just pieces that aren't fully fleshed out that we need to kind of strengthen in some way. And I think as an early entrepreneur, I was hit with my first kind of startup, just kind of really, I was very fortunate that it really took off, but I also was nervous. I was nervous because I was immediately thrown into a group of investors and people that I really respected. And I was scared to say, I don't know how to manage someone because this is my first time. I don't know how, there's like probably 10 to 15 things that just I had no experience in. And I was scared to ask for help. And so the entrepreneurs that I've backed, and I mean, I've seen this happen so many times. I remember like old school stories is like, before the like button came out on Facebook, this is a great one. This is a super old school. Zuckerberg came by to my office at Dig, and he was just really curious what a dig button was doing and like how we were using that in our algorithm to improve results based on social input, and just asking all these questions. And like the entire few hours was just him admitting, I don't know this, tell me more. I don't know this, tell me more. And it was clear to me that he was doing that in every aspect of his life because he was so young, and he had an even hotter startup that was taking off. And so he realized, I need to go out there and surround myself with people that can fill these gaps. And I think that was probably the biggest lesson that I learned, and sadly didn't start applying that to much later in life. So I think a lot of the failure I've had has been my lack to admit that I didn't know something, and try and fix it earlier. So that's a big one. The second one I would say is that in terms of failure, it's not looking at it. I don't know how you were raised and what kind of family background you have, but the nice thing about, and most families aren't like this, but the nice thing about my dad being an entrepreneur, my mom being an entrepreneur, was that there was just kind of this idea that if something didn't work, you would just move on to the next thing, and you would try your best, and you would try multiple things, and it was okay. And it wasn't really kind of like I've had many friends that have said, my parents made failure seem as though it was something you didn't discuss at the dinner table. It was something that you was looked down upon. And so once I was able to kind of frame that in my own head, is like failure is really just admitting that I've learned something new. And I was able to make that transition in my brain. Then it was like, oh, I want to fail all the time. Let's go try some crazy stuff. And it just didn't feel like, it just felt like, let's try 1,000 different things. And if only 3 of them work out, that's totally fine. And so that's been my career. It's been, if you take a look at the list of startups I've either been involved with or tried, like the majority of them have just gone to zero. And I'm totally okay with that. I'm going to have more zeros, but there's been a few that have worked out. And like, I think that's kind of like how you have to enter it. You won't beat yourself up as much when you have those, quote unquote failures. It'll just feel like new learnings.
I love that. And I just want to remind everyone in the audience really quickly, listen, I took notes. While Kevin is talking, I'm taking notes right now. And I hope that you all are too, because he is teaching me so much. Don't forget to tweet out your gems using the hashtag Techfest Northwest, tag Kevin Rose so he knows the impact that you've he's had on you today, but then also share it with people out there and drop your questions in the chat. I want to make sure to remind you all these things. Kevin, I wanted to pause for a second and talk about this just a little bit. And you asked me the question, like, I don't know what your experience was like. And I think about that. My parents are both from farm families. And my dad in particular is a Black man from the South, born in 1955, right? So he's born in Jim Crow South. And, he got a government job and did very well in that for a very long time. And while my parents didn't dissuade me from being an entrepreneur, I think the household they raised us in was one that was focused on stability, right? Because we didn't have runway. And then when I stepped into the world of entrepreneurship and I didn't have runway, which I didn't realize you should have maybe when you're out jumping into these kind of experiences. I think a lot of underrepresented entrepreneurs I talk to really struggle with failure, not because they don't see it as something that's exciting, but something that's more challenging for them because they don't have generational wealth. They don't, maybe they're supporting their family members. Oftentimes they're the ones who are taking care of their immediate family or their extended family. And so every moment really counts in a different way for them. And one of the questions I have for you is about finding the right people to help you so you can get over that hump faster. And so you were talking about like asking for help. How do you vet the right people so that you don't lose precious time hiring the wrong folks or getting the wrong investors or the wrong co-founders, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a couple things. One, the best people are going to be very busy, and they're going to be probably not someone you can just have a conversation with, and they probably won't even respond to your outreach on Twitter. They might have massive followings, and that's going to be very difficult. So I would say, oftentimes when you have very busy people like that, the best way to get a hold of them is not to send them a massive, multi-paragraph email that they will never read. The best way is just to say, I have one question for you. I just need 30 seconds of your time. I'm a fellow entrepreneur. This is the question that I know you will be the person to answer for me. Like very pointed, very short and concise, and try and get in front of them in that way. And I would say that is a way that I've reached out to people in the past. And also if you can tie it in to something that you're working on or, a little bit of your story there as well. I think that's the best way to get a hold of really experienced people. And I've done that either LinkedIn has never worked for me, sadly, like those messages, I've never used that, but I've used, Twitter obviously is a great one. Responding to people's newsletters is another great one. When we, in a non-COVID world, when they do have conferences and you can ask a question or walk up to someone and ask a question, that's a lot easier, obviously. So you just have to try multiple angles to get in front of those folks. And, you have to look for kind of domain expertise, like who is the authority in that particular area where I'm lacking, and not just asking a buddy or some kind of high school friend or some random person that you think. Like I was always like seek out the absolute best of the best to get the right answer.
Sorry, I was writing that down. Seek out the absolute best of the best to get the right answer. And Kevin, one of the things I was just thinking about is how important it is to, when you do that outreach, to make sure that it's relevant to that person as well, right? So it's like, I read this book, or I read this article, or I loved your newsletter. Just make sure it's not just about you. You're like spewing your heart out in an email, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I just did this like last week. It's funny. This is a random story. I'll go real quick because I know we don't have a lot of time, but I was setting up a new Mac, and there's a new Mac update that came out, and I was thinking about, okay, I should probably do like an antivirus type package on here or something just to keep me really safe because I'm all super paranoid about that. I was like, well, who would know the apps? Who would have the right answer here as to what I should be doing? And so I found this Google researcher that had done a bunch of like 0-day exploits on antivirus packages, so holes inside of antivirus packages. And it was this random Google researcher that had a Twitter account. And I'm like, they had their DMs open. They weren't following me. I was like, I'm just going to DM and ask one little simple question. And I'm like, I know you can't go on the record as being Google and saying this is the best antivirus package like to use. But am I right in thinking that I probably shouldn't use any antivirus at all? And I just want that one little question answered. He wrote back and he's like, you are correct. Like, don't use any antivirus at all. Like, it increases the attack area. And I'm like, thank you. That's all I need to know. Thank you very much. And that was, a little question, but I found the best kind of like security expert I could, and that didn't know me. And I was able to get that like really short and sweet answer because I asked such a tight question.
I love it. So be really strategic with your ask and be pithy. That's one of my favorite mentors, Shashi Jain, likes to say, be pithy. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about health and tech. And we talked about this earlier with failure. And I think this is actually one of the biggest contributors to poor mental health in founders, right? Is they're terrified of failing, or they're just working all the time to make their company work. And one of the conversations I was really excited to have with you is, how can founders run their tech startup and still protect their mental health, physical health, emotional health at the same time, when it feels like those two are at odds in so many ways?
Yeah, I've certainly been on both sides of this, and that in my earlier days when I was in my 20s, and early 30s, when I was really, really going hard in the startup world, it was very easy to just be all on all the time and just be on the computer nonstop. And it's funny when doctors talk to patients about like how many cigarettes they've smoked over their lifetime. They call these things like pack years. Like, how many pack years did you have? And they can kind of like then predict like their potential outcome for cancer and all these other horrible things. I feel like we have that on the digital side as well. Like, how many like laptop years do you have? Like fully into your computer, or without enough sleep, and like burning the candle at both ends. And there is something to be said about that. And I feel that the thing that I learned a little bit later on was that when you get to a point of, you can sustain that in small little bouts. Like, let's say everyone is pushing towards a launch and you're very excited. It's all hands on deck and you're going to launch a new version of your product. Like, that makes sense. But you just can't do that around the clock. And it leads to just poor decisions and not enough downtime and kind of subconscious time to also churn on ideas and thoughts. Like, there is value in not thinking about a problem, because your brain, whether you know it or not, will continue to kind of somewhat work on it in the background. And for me, it's always been the best solutions and best ideas that I've had have never been about putting in more hours, but just putting in the seed of an idea and sitting with it for a bit, and coming back and revisiting it every couple of days, and then eventually getting to an outcome that is a little bit more considered and rested, that from a place of rest versus a place of like strung out anxiety and stress, which I feel like forces the wrong decision, if that kind of makes sense. So that in knowing that, you have to plan your day. You just have to say, I am not going to make this about a 60-hour work week, and I'm not going to try and find time for the important things. I'm going to actually just make time for the important things. And it's a small little nuance in wording, but when you're actually making time for something, it's non-negotiable. Like, you will always do this particular thing because you have blocked it out in your calendar, and that is the healthy thing that you're going to do in that amount of time. So for me, going into COVID, knowing that there are limited activities that we can do, what I said is, I don't know the best activity. This is a whole new world. Like, I don't know the best thing that's going to give me the most, like, we all need an emotional boost right now and lift, because it's like very difficult being in home all day long without actually seeing other people. So what are the things that I can try to like get that boost and get that break from the computer? For me, I tried walking, I tried Zooming with friends, sauna usage, like cold plunge, meditation, intense cardiovascular, like high intensity interval training on like Peloton style, like all these different things. And I would try them for a couple of weeks, and then kind of stack rank them and say, okay, these are the ones that had the biggest, strongest emotional response and like clearing of my mind and like the release of anxiety. And then those are the ones that I would make sure to slot in during the week and make sure that they get adequate time, and that I do not compromise. I've made time for them, and I do them, when they are on the calendar, it does not move. And that's the most important piece, is just, you can't give that up. That's time for self-care, which is just so important.
Well, and what I keep thinking about over and over again, and I know you think about even more than I do as an investor, is how critical the founder and the founding team is to the success of the company. And so in the beginning, like, your unfair advantage is your passion, what you can do to build this. Like, your network, right? So with that said, how do you think Kevin of today is different from the Kevin who started Dig because of your health habits?
Yeah, I think that the difference is that I would say that I'm a little bit, well, I'm definitely not as scattered in terms of like my brain jumping around from idea to idea. I used to try and just take on so much. And I would say that my decisions are a little bit more considered because I've slowed down a bit. And I don't consider that a bad thing, actually. I think that's really leads to better outcomes and better decisions around investments and things of that nature. So also in just listening, honestly, like the biggest thing that's changed for me is when an entrepreneur is talking to me about an issue or a problem, or we're trying to work through something. It's not about hearing myself talk. It's about just like actually hearing them and what they're trying to say and the struggle that they're going through. Or, as we all know, like there's, it's like a full on, people always say, well, it's the ups and downs. Like I've always considered it like a roller coaster loop de loop, like the entrepreneurship, like life is just one that is so crazy from day to day, and you could be on a really high or super low or somewhere in the middle upside down. And I think it for me, it's just about how can I take the time to hear them fully before responding. And so that's kind of been the biggest difference, I would say, that has happened.
And I want to reiterate that for people because I know it's hard. I know it's hard to protect the time, especially in the early days of a startup, because you're saying, okay, Kevin, this is great advice, but I've got to do 8,000 things because there's not a big team. But what I'm hearing you say, when I heard you say a couple of weeks ago when we talked, is you might feel like you're going to get a short-term gain by executing on this task and this thing, but you might be actually missing something much bigger because your brain hasn't had time to rest and process the full data set that you've really been assessing. What do you think is one thing that early stage entrepreneurs could do today to really protect their health as they're very busy and trying to make the transition to Kevin of now?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things. One that you just mentioned about there's being so many things on the plate of an entrepreneur, like absolutely true. And I think one little thing you can do that is not breaking away from work, but that still involves work, is picking that one win that you want for that day. Like, what is that one thing that I want to accomplish today? That if I accomplish this and I put all of my energy and effort into it, or just like say 50% or 75% of my energy for the day, but I do get this thing done, I can actually shut my laptop at night and be like, okay, I did that one thing. That was the thing I wanted to really get done today, and I completed that. I think it's important to have some wins up on the board. Like when there's so many things, that's where the overwhelming feeling comes from, right? Because there's just like a thousand different things that need to get done, and all of a sudden it's like it paralyzes you just because there's so many little. You're like, which one do I tackle first? And I'll go after this one, and oh no, this one's popping up over here, and oh, there's a new email over here, and it's really hard. So you have to pick that win and find that win for the day, and you'll just feel so much better about shutting down the laptop at night. I think that's a big one. And then the second thing is, I think you just really need to say, how much time am I willing to protect and safeguard? And maybe that's only 30 minutes for you to get started. And then try something. Maybe it's just going for a walk for 30 minutes and commit to yourself. I'm going to do this for 2 weeks and see how it impacts you. And it may not be the thing for you. You could say walking does nothing for me. Now I'm going to go on and try and do some meditation. Maybe that is the thing that sticks for me. Or maybe my thing is doing a cold shower in the morning and following the Wim Hof method, which is so crazy and amazing. But you should Google that. That's insane. It's like eventually you.
Is that a whole new podcast?
The ice. Yeah, we could go on a whole new podcast about that. But like that's like some ice training but it makes you feel fantastic, and it is a nice release. So, there's no like perfect one thing. It's hard for me to be prescriptive and tell an entrepreneur this is the thing for you. You got to give yourself the time first and lock that in, and then commit to a certain duration, or not duration, but like a certain length in which you're going to try that, because walking doesn't feel good on day one because you're just like, I need to get back to work. Your mind can't settle, but it might feel amazing on day 5. So you have to like commit and say, I'm willing to try this for a couple of weeks, but start there and start with something that you can commit to, and you will stick with it.
Yeah. And I think that's so critical, everyone. I just want to bring this up again. It's finding one thing, right? You can't do everything. We know that you can't do everything. We don't want you to try and do everything. We want you to take care of yourself one step at a time. And just keeping in mind that if you're not there to run your startup because you're so tired or so ill, your startup can't move forward. And I know I'm saying that from a place of personal experience, right? To a point where I'm just like, you know what, I just got to shut down for the day because my brain cannot do any more work at this point. Kevin, so I'm excited to now transition to that into just before we get into Q&A. And a quick reminder, folks, please send us your questions. I got a couple of great questions in, but asking questions about Kevin's experience as an entrepreneur, about health and tech would be great. Kevin, how have your key insights now transitioned into your world as an investor, right? So as you're looking at founders and you're trying to make decisions about the right people, what do you see in the founders that are most successful that you decide to invest in, whether it's these habits or it's the tech industry? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is that they just have to be the type of ambitious entrepreneur that is willing to go out and just take on something that no one else will. And they have an insight and that is so clear to them. And they've seen and identified something very early on that they're just uber passionate about. And then that's what they want to spend they see it as their life's work. It's not just a slight modification of a pre-existing product, or, there's a lot of ideas that come to us that we look at and evaluate, and someone will say, well, I see this working well, this one hot little startup, I'm going to do a slightly different modification of it, and that'll be my little space to carve out. And those aren't as interesting as the big, bold, ambitious, first to market, blue ocean, meaning they're the first ones to enter the space. There's a lot of room for them to run. So I think a combination of novel idea and just a founder that is willing to learn and fail and kind of, take on a lot of risk. We realize that the majority of our investments are going to fail, and that's okay. We'd almost rather find the right type of founder and back them a second time than them not take on enough risk, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And also, I was listening to Charles Hudson at Precursor Ventures talk about the power of storytelling. He's like, get me excited, right? I want to feel your energy about what it is that you're building. And I think what's cool about that, and I've heard several folks say, is then I can turn and I can translate that energy to other people when I'm saying, you got to get on board, whether as an early hire, as another investor. So I think there's something exciting about storytelling in there as well. Any other thoughts you have about that, about telling the right story?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, if you're not feeling it, then it's probably not the right idea for you. Because I almost feel like that should come naturally. It's almost like it shouldn't be coached in a way. In that, if the entrepreneurs that I see that radiance comes from them, their heart, and they're like, this is so important to me. You don't understand. This is the way the world's going to be in 5-10 years. You're just not seeing it. And I'm like, well, tell me more. Show me. What are you talking about? That's what gets me really excited. But it is that story, and I feel like that the best ideas and entrepreneurs just have that in spades. It's just coming out of their soul. They must build this, and it's okay if you don't invest, because they'll find somebody else that will, because they have to go build this idea.
Yeah, it's that idea of the maven, right? This person that when you ask them to come to dinner with you, they only talk about that thing. And I'm laughing because I have a childhood best friend who loves Bitcoin so very much that everyone knows that when he comes to dinner, honey, it's a Bitcoin conversation. So.
Well, I mean, that's probably going to get even worse right now, right?
He just got a shirt that's I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm a Bitcoiner. And I was like, oh no, wow. It's on. Thank you. So shout out to my friend, Steven. You know who you are. All right. So another question that just came in is, Kevin, do you know if there are any other studies being conducted about digital health and how some of these ideas might be integrated into work life? Kevin, tell us what you know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not, it's funny. I'm not familiar with a lot of or any academic work that's being done at the university side on these types of things. I am, however, familiar with the entrepreneurs that are kind of pushing the envelope here and trying new things. I would say Jason Fried, founder of Basecamp and Hey, he's a fantastic entrepreneur that for decades has been pushing remote work, new ways of compensating employees and taking care of his employees and forcing them not to work after a certain number of hours, legitimately I don't know about punishing them is the right word, but not allowing them to work after a certain number of hours. He even talked, I had him on a podcast at one point, and he was saying that they looked into potentially getting Fitbits for their employees where they would compensate them more for sleeping more hours in the night. Like just some really radical ideas where it was all about how can I ensure that my employees are in the best emotional and mental state and really care for my employees more so than anyone else would. And I would say that a lot of that has found its way into any podcast that Jason has done. I know he did one on the Tim Ferriss show that was great. Also, all of his books, like Jason Fried has written like I think 3 or 4 different books now, and they're all fantastic, and they all have different little insights there as to what you can do for your employees and for yourself. So I think he would be my go-to person for someone that has kind of really thought through a lot of these problems.
I love it. I love it. Kevin, you are also now one of our go-to people as we think through all the things entrepreneur. It's time for us to wrap up. So my last question for you really quickly is, what is your final gem? And the second, to two-parter, where can people find you after this?
Yeah, my final gem okay, so people can just find me. I'm just at Kevin Rose on Twitter. I don't tweet a ton, but like a couple times a month. I would say that in terms of final gem, that's a hard one. I don't know that I have any.
Kevin, geez.
Well, I would say that. Well, one thing I would like to mention that I think is important, and it's in terms of people that are trying to find the balance on the emotional side and that have tried meditation. I think that meditation is a buzzy word these days, and there's a lot of people out there that have given all of the major apps like a try. Everyone's tried Headspace or Calm or whatever, right? I think that what we're going to see in the next decade or so is that there'll be a move away from how can I do the shortest amount of meditation, the shortest duration, and the more prescriptive nature of a lot of these apps. So a lot of these apps will say, I'm having an SOS moment, I need help. I'm having a fear of flying. They're very, very different buckets of I'm having this type of anxiety or this type of issue. And I think those can certainly be really beneficial for those like really kind of moments of need. You have to jump into something because you're kind of freaking out. But where I see this going is just there's a certain subset of those people that are now starting to say, okay, historically, it's about a deeper practice here, and a lot of the benefits, the benefits that last and make themselves known in a non-stressful situation, so more of a lower baseline, if you will, and not so much about treating like the spikes, happen with like a deeper practice. So I'm excited to see a lot of entrepreneurs and people that are saying, okay, 10 minutes was great, but I want to actually go in a little bit deeper here and see what there is to explore. And I think Sam Harris has a great app where he encourages a lot of that. And some of these apps are now starting to kind of push more of that type of content. So I like to see and I hear about entrepreneurs like trying to embrace that as well. And I've certainly seen a lot of benefit in that for myself, is going much further than just what you see in some of the more popular apps out there.
Well, Kevin, you have been a gem yourself. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you, and we're going to give you lots of love on Twitter. So folks, please don't forget to do that. Kevin, have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you in person at some point in the future.
Yes. I mean, we're in the same city. We've got to make that happen.
Yeah. With our dogs, chasing
masks on the dogs, whatever it takes.
Mask on squirrels, mask on everyone. All right, Kevin,
exactly.
Well, have a great day. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, don't forget to give Kevin love. Look, I kept him a little bit longer. I apologize. I am just terrible hosting at the top here. So guess what? It's time to head on over. We've got our Pitch Fest Room 1 is going to be having some great magic. Pitch Fest Room 2. So head on over there. I've kept you 5 minutes over. I think it was worth it, but sorry for keeping you a little late. I will see you on the other side when we come back to the main stage a little bit later this morning. Have a great morning.